Welcome everybody. We're on the final chapter of the course textbook anyway, which is chapter 11, which deals with high performance work systems, etc. Because there's a couple of other what I call kitchen sink topics that are thrown in there at the end, which we need to kind of cover in the course, but didn't get a chance to do this. So anyway, this chapter, at least at the beginning, attempts to knit many of the previous 10 chapters sort of into a into one. So all right, so if you put everything together, you can come up with a high performance work system. All right, that's where we're headed here. Okay, so to take a look at the key idea, and this is a long one. So the key idea is a high performance work system, or an HPWS, as we say in the business, is a business strategy, okay, that integrates the right, this is important, people, technology, and organizational structures. Integrates those around an organization's goals, okay? So sophisticated HR practices that create a superior employee experience, lots of great buzzwords, such as meaningful jobs, empowerment, work teams, information sharing, focused recruitment, plentiful training development, performance-based compensation, performance management that directs employees' behavior and optimizes turnover, HR auditing are vital to implementing a high-performance work system. So if you had looked at this laundry list right here, it's a number of the state-of-the-art people practices that we talked about in chapters 3 through 9. This is one way to integrate them all. Or another way of looking at it is really simply as a high-performance work system is taking the whole bag of tricks you learned from chapters 3 to 9 and integrate them all together in order to reach the organization's goals. All right, that's the key idea. Learning objectives, there's 5 here. The first 1, 2, or the first part of the second one as well, sort of deal directly with high performance work systems. The rest of these objectives are kind of other sort of short topics that we should have probably covered somewhere else in the textbook, but they, for whatever reason, have chosen to get them in right at the end, okay? So kind of a bit of a kitchen sink chapter here, high performance work systems plus etc. All right, let's look at the first one. Define what a high performance work system is and identify the key elements, outcomes, and conditions associated with such a system. Okay. So here's a non-technical definition. So you won't find this in your textbook, but I just sat down one day and wrote this out, and it seemed to make sense to me. So we talk about a high-performance work system. It's basically you hire the right people. Makes sense. Compensate and train them well. Okay. Engage them. Make them into their jobs. Actively seek their input. Provide them with the proper tools. Share information. Get them to work in teams, and design effective work processes that result in the desired outcomes, i.e. productivity, efficiency, profits, customer satisfaction, quality, low turnover, etc. So in a nutshell is use many, most, or all of the state-of-the-art sophisticated HR practices that we talked about in chapters 3 through 9. Okay, or the other way, for those who are more mathematically inclined, it's good people, good technology, good organization, all working together to create success, all right, or high performance. All right, so that's it in a nutshell. Now the rest of it is more technical and textbook stuff, but if you ever want to come back to what a high performance work system is, this is your slide, people. Okay, one of the things that your textbook doesn't do, which it should, is the way it presents a high-performance work system is, hey, this is the be-all and end-all. Everybody should do this. I'm going to disagree with that point in saying that high performance is only one possible strategy. Okay, so besides high performance, there are other alternative work systems. An example. Instead of having a high-performance work system, you might have a low-cost system where you minimize the cost of inputs. Example, cheap labor, minimal inventory, large production runs. standard model, to maintain your cost advantage over competitors. So if you wanted to produce a cheap cotton t-shirt, okay, if that was the ultimate goal of your organization, I would argue that a low-cost system would probably be more effective for your strategy than a high-performance work system. A high-performance work system is more appropriate in other industries. Example, come up with the state-of-the-art computing device, or maybe finding the cure or a vaccine for COVID would be a more applicable place for a high-performance work system, and less appropriate for others. Example, again, producing a standard cotton t-shirt. Okay, so it's one possible strategy. Another thing your textbook doesn't tell you about high-performance work systems, they have downsides. Number one, if you're not all in, they don't work. All right, you got to do everything. You can't eliminate one or two things, okay, because of cost or laziness or whatever, right? So many companies won't spend the money to do all the elements. So for example, one of the hallmarks of a high performance work system is that you have self-directed work teams. All right. Now, if you haven't trained people how to act in a self-directed work team, it's probably going to fail, because most people are used to working in traditional supervisor-driven teams. All right. So yeah, you can't sort of pick and choose the element. You got to do everything. You got to do the compensation. You got to do the training. You've got to do the job design, right? If you miss on one or two of these things, it probably won't work. Second, if you're not committed long-term, they don't work. Oftentimes in economic crunch, the first thing are cut are training, good compensation, costly hiring practices. All right. Again, yeah, like I said, if you don't, you got to be all in, and you got to be all in for the long term, right? You can't just sort of be in and out, otherwise it'll fail. And third, ultimately, workplace control remains with management. Some authors will purport that a high-performance work system is really union substitution. You don't need a union if you have a high-performance work system in place, right? Because you know, what's there to fight for? You've got good wages, you've got good training, you got voice, employee input. You've got everything that you get with a union. The problem with a high-performance work system is ultimately control remains with management. Okay, so they will give you, or they'll listen to you, and they will give you good wages, and they will provide good training until a time when they decide they don't. Okay, if you have a collective agreement and you've written that into the terms and conditions of your employment in your contract, these things are guaranteed, okay, at least for the life of the contract, right? Okay, so yeah, all these goodies remain under control of management in a high-performance work system. In a union situation, all these goodies get written into a collective agreement, which remains in effect, all right, until it expires. Okay, some of this stuff is getting to be a little bit redundant, but anyway, this is kind of a graphic way of looking at it. It's a nice chart that your textbook had. So it talks about elements of a high-performance work system. So let's say, for example, Medicine Hat College decides what's its organizational goal. The ultimate goal might be, we would like to be the best small college in Canada. Okay, and to do this, we're going to implement a high-performance work system. Okay, and ultimately at the end, if we turn out to be the best small college in Canada, we will have succeeded in our goal, right? So in terms of these other elements here, what are the elements of these high-performance work system that will get us to being the best small college in Canada? Well, information systems. Okay, information systems communication, right? So, you know, people have the information they need to work with, okay, both the academics and the non-academics. Organizational structure, so we have an administration that is optimal for guiding all the people and processes in a way towards our goal. Task design, jobs, okay, so faculty are given jobs that are reasonable in terms of workload, that really lead towards really good educational outcomes. People, selection, training, and development. So we've hired good people, both academic, non-academic, provide them with training, and give them developmental opportunities so that some of these people ultimately will move up and be administrators at some point. And finally, reward systems. Okay, so we structure the pay, benefits, and other reward systems around this goal of being the best small college in Canada, right? People get rewarded for doing things towards that system, and they get not rewarded or even sanctioned if they're doing things that aren't towards that particular performance goal. Okay, so in a high-performance work system, managers recognize the interrelationship between the different elements is crucial. Everybody's in everything we do is tied to that goal about being the best small college in all of Canada here, right? And so integration between the elements and the relationship is crucial for a high-performance work system. Okay, so outcomes of a high-performance work system. All right, so if I do all this, I can expect interesting jobs, satisfied and engaged workers, low absenteeism, which lead to lower costs, lower turnover, higher quality work, satisfied customers, or students in this case, if we're using the Medicine Hat College example here. Higher salaries, I guess more students, higher profits, which in the terms of an educational institution would mean just better use of resources, greater productivity, innovation, we're doing new stuff, and knowledge sharing. All right, so if I do all this stuff in a high performance work system, these are the outcomes. Sounds like a great place to work. I'm in. Okay, so conditions that contribute to high performance, and these will all be knitted into three upcoming slides here, which is into three conditions. So high performance work systems, teams and employee empowerment, okay? So a lot of group decisions, and then decisions are made by lower level employees. Not everything is as top down. It's made by supervisors and managers in terms of decisions. Formal performance feedback, so good performance management system. Lots of training, very good rewards and compensation. Oftentimes your rewards are also performance-based. State-of-the-art equipment and technology. Okay, you got good tools to work with. Participating in the planned change. So again, getting input when there's a change. Work design for interesting work. Contribute to the finished product. So everybody's got a sense of how their a sense of the whole, how their contribution helps the organization achieve its goals to become, let's say, the best small college in Canada. And finally, ethical behavior. Okay, people are doing the right thing. All right, these next three slides are kind of the key probably to this objective here. So, you know, if you can name the three conditions and talk a little bit about them leading to high performance work system, you'll have this one mastered here. Okay, so condition number one is teamwork and empowerment. Okay, so employees are empowered to make decisions that affect the organization. They have the responsibility and the authority. Okay, so for example, if you're in a retail store, they have the responsibility for ensuing customer satisfaction. They would have the authority to do something like issue a refund if needed. Okay, so you just put decision-making really close to the customer. Team approach is used. Okay, so self-directed work teams rather than managers. Okay, so, yep. And your managers tend to facilitate and coordinate, okay, rather than dictate, okay, day-to-day operations. So you have managers who are more like guides, okay, that facilitates, not bosses who direct every little task that has to go on in the organization, okay. Number two, knowledge is shared, okay, so organizations become learning organizations. Okay, we talked about this in the chapter 6, I believe it was, with the employee learning. So there's continuous learning. Okay, employees understand the whole process, big picture, and people strive to get better at their jobs. Okay, so the antithesis of employees understand the whole process would be if you were on an assembly line and you were the guy who all he did was install the right front wheel on the car coming down the assembly line. You have no idea how the whole process works. You have no idea what the whole car is. That's not a high performance work system. That is the antithesis. That is the opposite of a high performance working system, right? So employees understand the whole process of, if again, bring it back to the college, of training someone to be a graduate in a diploma or certificate or degree diploma, right? And that people strive to get better at their jobs. Okay, a lot of professional development is done. There's processes in place to share knowledge. So for example, at the college, you would have, and actually they do quite a bit of this, they have a Friday online session where people were sharing what worked, what didn't work for them in terms of online learning and classes, right? So there's processes like these Friday online discussions, okay, is a process to share knowledge. Critical thinking, so people challenge the status quo. Just because we did that last year doesn't necessarily need to do that this year. There's a learning culture, so administration, they do is encourage experimentation, flexibility, and employee input is sought and actually valued. So they actually listen to the people doing the job when decisions are being made. And condition number 3, leading to a high performance work system, satisfaction and engagement. Okay, studies show that satisfaction is correlated with high individual performance. You like your job, you're likely to have high individual performance. Okay, satisfaction, ways to increase satisfaction. Well, start right at the recruiting process, recruiting optimistic people and referring depressed people for help. Okay, so making sure everybody's got that the glass is half full attitude. Designing meaningful jobs with clear roles. Okay, so people understand what they need to do. People value what they do. You know, my job is important. This one's important, is employee values equals the organizational values. You really get job commitment if your organization's values are the same as your employees' values. Let's say, for example, one that's usually used is you talk about employees who are really green. You know, they want to save the planet. Well, they are going to be more satisfied if they feel that their organization is also really committed to saving the planet. Okay, so values alignment there, and obviously adequate and fair pay. Okay, so you're paid enough, and you also feel you're paid fairly compared to other people in the organizations and people in other organizations. Okay, so satisfaction is one level. To level up, I always love that for all you gamers out there. So to level up from job satisfaction, employee engagement is the next step. Okay, so engagement is employees who are satisfied, all this stuff, committed to and support what's important to the organization. Okay, so they like their jobs and they're really into the company, really into the organization. What has research showed us about engaged employees? They tend to quit less, lower turnover, they tend to put extra effort and higher quality work, and they tend to speak well of the organization, which is really helpful if you're recruiting other people. Okay, there was a lot in that first objective. Let's cycle back and recap it very simply. Okay, so define high-performance work system, identify elements, outcomes, and conditions associated with it. Okay, a couple things I want you to know is number 1. So basically a high-performance work system is a combination of good people, good technology, good organization structure that leads to high performance. Second thing to remember is a high-performance system is one way to do business. Okay, there's other ways to do business, like a low-cost system, for example. So it's not necessarily the be-all and end-all in every situation. Much more suited to a complex creative task like finding the vaccine for COVID rather than a task like producing a simple cotton t-shirt. And the 3 conditions, okay, for high performance work systems. Number 1, teamwork and empowerment. Number 2, sharing of knowledge. And number 3, satisfied and engaged employees. Lots of stuff in that objective. All right, let's look at objective 2. Explain how human resource management can contribute to high performance. So what can the HR function do in this case? What can they do? Ooh, look at this. Nice. Look at the dynamic slides like that. Awesome stuff. Okay, so if you look at these kind of correspond to a lot of the chapters. Chapter 3 stuff, HR can do job design. Jobs must be designed appropriately. Often employees work in teams and collaborate to make decisions. So basically interesting jobs and jobs with teamwork and collaboration, okay? Recruitment and selection, attract employees who will thrive, okay? Creative, share knowledge, identify more than technical skills. So when you're looking for employees, sure, they need the technical skills, but they also have to have the soft skills that will allow them to thrive in a high performance work system, right? So they've got to be good team players. They got to be creative. Training and learning and development, lots of it, okay? And also sort of on an individual basis, also on a team basis. So you're doing a lot of team building stuff as well. Performance management, employees know the organization's goals and how to achieve them and identify situational constraints. So very clear goals, okay? So we know, everybody, if we're Medicine Hat College, we know that we're all about trying to be the best small college in Canada. And identify situational constraints. Well, there's budget is usually one of those, right? So the fact that, yes, we have this, but we've got to do it within budget constraints. Okay, other things. This is other contributions, compensation and rewards. So linking employee rewards to performance. Okay, so oftentimes bonuses, pay for performance systems are associated with high performance work systems, and include employees in pay decisions. All right, and probably an example there is they might value other rewards rather than straight Skrilla dollars, bucus de leros. All right, and if you can, pay them in what they want, be it benefits, extra vacation, something like that, that's going to be more powerful than just continually piling on dollars. Mergers and acquisitions, okay? HR participate right from the start. So if the company decides to acquire or combine with another company, getting HR involved, because the culture of the organizations, making sure that the cultures are compatible, is a really important part of a smooth merger and acquisition. Technology, okay? Automating HR processes to improve efficiency. So for example, I think way back when we did compensation benefits, I told you about Marion, the woman who knew everything about benefits when I worked at Grand Prairie Regional College. So again, moving away from a system where you have to call Marion to find out the balance of your what's that called? Health spending account to a self-serve system. It's just a lot more efficient, even though we all liked Marion. Other elements, corporate social responsibility, so sustainability, environmental stewardship, volunteerism, all sorts of those good things, incorporating those into your human resource practices. Meaningful work and ethics, okay, so doing the right thing. A high-performance system will also manage turnover. And the thing about turnover is you don't want zero turnover. Okay, a little bit of turnover is good, okay, because you get new ideas in there. But really having low turnover is usually better. People who've been in the job longer tend to be better at their jobs than if you're constantly having to try to train new people. And the last part is appropriate discipline. So fair, legal, and effective methods. Progressive discipline. So having systems where consequences are delved out when consequences need to be delved out. The three previous slides were really the meat of learning objective number 2. The remaining slides detail just detail some of the things that were kind of briefly brought up in those first 3 slides, right? A lot of the stuff in these next slides here is good stuff. It's things that we probably should have brought up in other parts of the course, but for whatever reason they're stuck in this learning objective here. So for the remaining slides in this objective, really focus on the definitions, because the type of questions you'll get on these slides are more definitional. More definitional than conceptual questions in midterm or a final. Actually, you're well beyond the midterm, so it will be the final, right? Okay, so the first one concept is corporate social responsibility. So a developing concept integrating social, environmental, and economic concerns into organizationalist values, culture, decision-making strategy, and operations in a way that creates wealth and improves society, also referred to as corporate citizenship, responsible business, or the triple bottom line. Boy, is that a mouthful. The way to remember corporate social responsibility is 3 P's, and those are people, planet, and profit. So it's when you're making a decision, or your organization's values and culture should always consider profitability, but also how it affects people and how it affects the planet, okay, or the whole green thing. All right. So some of the tenets that of corporate social responsibility, one is sustainability, and it usually refers to environmental sustainability, right? So growing trend for young, intelligent employees to integrate personal and professional goals. Oh boy, doesn't really match up. But anyway, the way I look at sustainability is what impact does this have on the planet on an ongoing basis? Meaningful work is another tenet. So match employees with on-the-job roles and projects that connect to their values. Okay, kind of goes without saying. Volunteerism, okay, is usually a component of social responsibility. Fosters a sense of community. Give you an example of that. The accounting firm that my son works for, usually a couple times a year, the entire group goes out and volunteers at a soup kitchen, right? So it's a team building aspect, but it's also, it does a little bit for the community. And then the final part of corporate social responsibility is ethics. So establishing principles for fair behavior and promoting ethical behavior through things like code of ethics. So doing the right thing. Okay, so corporate social responsibility is an important concept that can be used for high performance. Another thing they sort of glossed over in those first 3 slides was the whole concept of turnover. And there's 4 slides right now because it's a rather involved concept here. Okay, so the part of turnover is that engagement will lead to lower turnover. And generally you want lower turnover because turnover is costly, right? And there's 2 types of turnover. There's voluntary turnover when the employee's choice, they quit or retire. And there's involuntary turnover when it's the employer's choice. So fired, laid off, downsized, right-sized, whatever. Okay, so 2 types of turnover. Engaged employees, well, generally have less voluntary and less involuntary turnover. Okay, chances of getting fired are less, and the chances of you leaving, quitting are less. All right, turnover is costly. So why? Because recruiting and training costs. I got to replace the person, so I've got to recruit and select them. There's costs involved with there, and training to get them up to speed. And generally, their productivity is usually lower in the first part due to the learning curve, right? And also, particularly with involuntary turnover, if you fire people, there's legal costs if it can be done incorrectly, right? So generally what we're looking at is trying to have low but not zero productivity, because Not all turnover is bad. Turnover allows for new employees, fresh approach, creative thinking, that sort of thing, right? So you don't want to be in a situation where nobody's leaving because organization can get stale. All right, a couple definitions here. Just cause, that is terminating an employee, involuntary turnover, for a serious breach of the employment contract, theft, refusing to work, insubordination, incompetence, etc. No notice or termination pay is required. So if somebody is fired for just cause, goodbye, you're done. I don't have to give you any notice in terms of this is happening next week. It's happening right now, and I don't have to give you any pay in lieu of not giving you notice. All right, so just to give you an example, we had a colleague a number of years ago fired for sexual harassment. All right, theft is another one, just cause. Drunk driving in a work vehicle would be able to do that. Sometimes it's a series of things. Being consistently late for work after being warned and after being written up and after being given the suspension and you're still late. That would be just cause. Okay, so that's one important concept. If you're gonna get rid of somebody involuntarily and you don't want to pay them, it needs to be for just cause. Constructive dismissal is another one. And constructive dismissal is when the employee makes major unilateral changes in the employee contract. Okay, an employee has her salary cut 25%. Notice or termination pay is required. Just to give you an example, let's say the college came to me and said, Bill, all right, from now on, you're not teaching human resource management for the rest of this term. You're going to shovel snow at the college. Said, okay, and you're going to shovel snow at 50% of the wage that we were going to give you to teach the course. And I says, is that a major unilateral change in the employment contract? And I would say, yes, I agreed as part of my contract to teach for X dollars per hour, and you're paying me less. And also the nature of the employment is quite different. I'm not, sitting at my computer here teaching I hope young, most of you are young compared to me, students human resource management. I'm actually having to shovel snow. So if the college were to do that, that would be constructive dismissal, and they would owe me termination pay, or notice on that, which unfortunately would be zero due to employment standards, because they would likely do that within the first 3 months of my contract. All right, where was I going with that? Good. Yeah, okay, awesome. All right, so moving on. Some more definition is notice. So employees are required to inform employees that their job is ending. Okay. The legal minimum periods range from 0 if you're employed less than 3 months to multiple months. Okay, so for example, if I had been full-time, I'm on a contract employee, so it doesn't matter. My contract's done, I'm done. But if I were working full-time for the college and they said, all right, Bill, we're not going to be able to employ you next year, they would need to give me some notice. And actually, notice in that case is in our collective agreement. But if we weren't under the collective agreement, the notice would be at least what they had for employment standards, right? So if I'd been there 10 years, you could look it up, it's 5 or 6 weeks of notice. Now, that notice can either be just say, hey, continue working, continue working, and your job will end in 5 weeks. Or most commonly, it's termination or severance pay, because usually you don't want people hanging around. Okay, so how much work are you going to get out of Bill in the next 5 weeks if he knows his job is ending? Okay, and there's just, for a number of reasons, it's better just usually to get rid of the person, pay them out, than just give them notice, give them notice that it's ending here. The other thing about notice is for long-term senior executives or highly skilled positions, awfully advisable to give pay or terminate pay well beyond the legal minimums. Okay, and the reason for that is that the courts will, when with the common law employment contract, the courts will give senior executives highly skilled positions. It's more difficult to find these positions, so they will require longer periods of notice than what is in employment standards. Typically if you wanted to get rid of a president, for example, and he'd been there for 2 or 3 years, you're probably looking in the range of 6 months, 9 months. Okay, even though employment standards would say a couple weeks. Okay. All right. The other part of turnover here is justice. As an employer, you have the power to terminate any employee for any reason. However, the way you go about it may cost you. All right. So to minimize these costs or to not do harm, it's important to let the HR people do that. So firing a person is not something the line manager do. That's definitely you're going to have to involve the HR person, because leave it to a professional, right? And there's some systems in place, right? Okay, so one of the things, if you want to minimize your cost, is one, to make sure you have just cause. Okay, that's important. And the other one is you need to have a fair and just system in place. Okay, if you're getting rid of somebody for just cause and you don't want to pay them out. Number one, outcome fairness based on rational criteria. So if we get rid of somebody based on, let's say, sexual harassment, okay, is that a rational criteria? If you have sexually harassed another employee or a student, is that a fireable offense? And we can, yes, we can definitely back that one up. Okay, so there'd be outcome fairness. Procedural fairness, did the person have a fair hearing? Okay, so we heard from both sides in order to make the decision that it was in fact sexual harassment. The person was guilty of sexual harassment. And the other one is interactional distance, take into account the employee's feelings. So you can't sort of be mean, nasty, or just sort of bully people into quitting, okay, or something like that. So, while you're going through this whole thing, you, again, take the employee's feelings into account. It's called the Wallace effect, because there was a fellow by the name of Wallace, and I guess his employers were really, really mean when they were trying to get the person trying to get him to quit. And it was a landmark case. So he was given extra pay in lieu of notice just because, they were mean to him. So that's the Wallace effect. All right, that was turnover. Now, an alternative to terminate, there's an alternative to termination with is employee discipline. So instead of getting rid of people, if we could get them to mend the errors of their ways, it's probably good for everybody. It's good for the employee, they can do their job, good for the employer, because we don't have some of the costs that are associated with turnover here. So what employee discipline is management's action to encourage compliance with the organization's standards. Okay, so for example, employee doesn't wear their PPE, their hard hat. You might start with communication. Hey, you're not wearing your hard hat. We need you to wear your hard hat for your safety and the safety of others. Make sure you do that. Second time doesn't wear his PPE, well, write him up in warning, and then we can go to progressive discipline. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Okay, so actions. So the fact that pointing it out to the person, perhaps writing a person up, perhaps suspension without pay, that sort of thing are definite actions to encourage compliance about wear your PPE. Now, preventive discipline is known as any action prior to the infraction to encourage employees to follow the rules. So modeling good behaviors. So the supervisor is always wearing their PPE. Or you always see communicating a safety first message. Or training people, in your training, really going over the importance and why wearing PPE is important. So that's known as the preventive discipline to prevent infractions. Now, corrective discipline follows when a rule has been broken. Okay, so disciplinary is typically a penalty. So why do we have a penalty if you're not wearing your PPE? Number one, get the offender to reform, because we want everybody wearing the 2, to deter others from similar behavior. So if there's a penalty, ooh, let's see what happened to that guy. I don't want that to happen to me. And then finally, to maintain consistent group standards. So again, if there's a penalty in one case, not a penalty in another case, nobody knows what the rule is, right? So again, being consistent is important with discipline. Okay, so again, with discipline here, you have a couple more things to define here. One is due process. So follow the proper rules and procedure for disciplinary action. Okay, giving the employee responsibility to respond to allegations. Documentation is free, and that really speaks back to what we talked about here. Is the system needs to be fair and true to outcome, procedural, and interactional justice. Okay. Progressive discipline is the use of stronger and stronger penalties for repeat offenders. So there's a reference in your textbook. Generally, with progressive discipline, you have a verbal warning, written warning, suspension without pay, and termination. So not wearing your hard hat, hey, wear your hard hat. Come on, it's the rules. Number 2, okay, this is the second time you were caught without wearing your hard hat. I'm going to write you up, and that's going to go in your file. This is the third time we've caught you without wearing your hard hat. So you will be suspended for 2 days without pay. Okay, and happens one more time, we're going to get rid of you. And guess what? Happened another time. So the 4th time, it's terminated. And in that case, it would be termination for just cause, which is failure to follow the rules, right? Okay, now some offenses warrant immediate discipline, like a major theft. Okay, somebody stole thousands of dollars, for example. They don't have to go through progressive discipline on that. You're done. Okay, or it could be something like maybe Bill decides to get all jarred up, go to the Medicine Hat's business department Christmas party and punch the dean in the nose. Okay, well, that's clearly a ridiculous scenario. 1, the dean's a nice guy. Why would you want to punch him in the nose? And number 2, with COVID, the online, the Christmas party was online, so it's pretty hard to punch somebody on the nose using your computer. I digress. What we're talking about here. Okay, yeah, some offenses warrant immediate discipline. Okay, so if you want to see what some of those PD, progressive discipline offenses are, page 300 is a really good reference. Okay, final thing we have in employment discipline is something called the hot stove rule, and this is kind of a cool little shortcut here. So discipline should be immediate, consistent, and impersonal. So Bill decides that he wants to put his hand on the top of a burner on the stove. What happens? He gets burned. Okay, and it's painful. All right, so first of all, so the burn and the pain is his discipline, right? Is it immediate? Absolutely. As soon as he starts burning his hand, it's going to hurt. Is it consistent? Okay, so one time he puts his hand on the stove, gets burned. What happens the second time? He gets burned. What happens the third time? He gets burned. What happens the 86th time? He gets burned. All right, so it's consistent and impersonal. Okay, the stove doesn't care whether it's Bill or whether it's Harambe or whether it's the dean or whether it's the president. Doesn't matter. Okay, anybody puts their hand on that stove is going to get burned. So it doesn't. It's definitely doesn't vary by person. Okay, so any discipline then should fall under the hot stove rule and be immediate, consistent, and impersonal. Okay, final slide then in Learning Objective 2 deals with an alternative to discipline, which is called an EAP, which is Employee Assistance Plan, okay? Which is employee-supported counseling and help for personal problems. Quite often drug and alcohol addiction, sometimes mental health issues, sometimes both, because those kind of go hand in hand a lot of times, which are affecting work performance. Okay, so the reason that Bill has been late for consistently is because he's dealing with a raging drug problem or a raging alcohol addiction, right? So sure, we could go after Bill for lateness and then probably get rid of him, or The better approach, particularly for a longer term employee, is actually deal with the cause of why he's being late, right? So, you know, providing employment supported counseling for this. Let them see if we can get Bill to dry out, for example. And yeah, so this is good for a number of reasons. Obviously, it's a more humane approach. It's good for the organization because Bill's a good instructor. We want to keep him. It's good for Bill because he wants to keep his job. The other reason you want to go the employee assistance routes rather than the discipline route is, again, think back to human rights, because you have a duty to accommodate people with medical conditions, right? So you can't discriminate based on a medical condition, and substance abuse, alcohol addiction, mental health issues will fall under that, right? So again, rather than sometimes or frequently, or is if you kind of look deeper, an employee assistance program, getting the person help with counseling might be the way to go rather than going down the road of discipline and termination. Okay, so let's cycle back then to learning objective 2, and there was a lot in there. Okay, so let's cycle back then to learning objective 2 and kind of recap it here. All right, so the things we want you to get out of learning objective 2 is, first of all, we listed 10 ways that human resources can contribute to high performance. So you should be able to list several of those. Excuse me, several of those ways on an exam. So for example, one of the ways human resource management can contribute to high performance is by recruiting people with soft skills, good soft skills, in addition to technical skills. Another way that human resource management can contribute to high performance is designing interesting jobs. Okay, interesting and engaging jobs. So that was the first part of the objective. And then the rest of the objective, there was all those sort of random topics, right? So know what corporate social responsibility is and why it's important. Know some of the ins and outs of turnover. Not all turnover is bad. So you want low but not zero turnover. You should know what just cause is. The whole concept of notice or pay in lieu of notice, and what constructive dismissal is where somebody changes the terms and conditions of the job and sort of forcing people to quit, but noted that you're on the hook for notice if you constructively dismiss someone. The other two things on this objective is the whole idea of discipline. Okay, discipline, which are actions employer takes in order to get compliance with the rules. And you should know a little bit about progressive discipline, the fact that usually you don't get, unless it's a really, really egregious, I love that word, sin that somebody did in employment, you don't get rid of them right away. You need to go through usually 3 or 4 steps. And finally, the last part in this was the whole idea of an employee assistance plan as a alternative to termination for discipline. It's not really discipline, it's just an alternative to termination, right? So what an employee assistance plan is and why it's a good idea. All right, we're into the last 3 objectives of this unit, this chapter 11. And these are short ones. So if this were a game show, these next 3 objectives, because they're so short, would be the equivalent of the lightning round. So let's go. Number 3, summarize the ways to measure the effectiveness and impact of human resource management. 1 slide. And the key word here is HRM audit. Okay, those of you in accounting, you love audits, right? So here's a chance to do one for human resource management. Okay, so since human resources is a management function, like marketing operations, like everything else in business, it should be check. Plan, do, and check. So the audit is the check function here, okay? So a way to determine whether the resources that we've spent on HRM have been spent wisely. So the HRM audit is a means of assessing this investment. All right, so if you looked on table 11.7 to 302 and 303 in your textbook, there's a list of HR metrics and measurements. So some things you could look at would be things like, I'll read it straight out of the textbook, average years of experience in education of hires, of new hires, percentage of overtime hours to regular hours, okay. Training dollars or training days per employee. Obvious one would be the turnover rate, how many people are quitting or leaving in a year, and another might be the absenteeism rate. So are people showing up for work on a regular basis, right? So when you do an audit, you can take a look at those figures, and it's really good thing to look at things from quarter to quarter or year to year, and then you can look at trends, and that might identify opportunities or identify problems which you can solve through HR initiatives. All right, so quickly recap number 3. Measuring the effectiveness and impact of human resource management. The way to do that is with an audit. HR audit is a means to track and evaluate the impact of human resource initiatives within the organization. Number 4, describe how technology can be used to improve the effectiveness and impact of human resource management. God, I love technology. Okay, so a couple applications we see in human resource management. Sort of the basic one is transaction processing, computing and calculating and reviewing and documenting HR decisions and practices. And the classic example there would be automatic payroll. So instead of having a accountant with a green eye shade and manual, what do you call those, charts and things like that, what they're even called, you know, with the calculator there figuring everything out, you can easily automate that with automatic payroll systems, right? So that just makes things a lot more accurate and reduces errors, and certainly a lot faster. Decision support systems, so software systems to help you solve problems. So maybe a program to determine how many people should be hired in the next year, perhaps would help you to forecast the number of openings you're going to have in, let's say, one of the departments based on the number of people approaching retirement age. Okay, so computer would spit out a you know, a forecast there of how many people you would need. Beyond that, you have expert systems, so computer systems that support decisions by making decision rules used by people with expertise. So for example, you could scan resumes into a computer system, and the expert system could look for keywords, and then based on the use of keywords in that in their analysis, it might give you a point you towards who you should shortlist for that particular, for interviews for that particular position, right? So an expert system, right? Other types of technology is the human resource information systems, okay, which is a database of information. So instead of like the old days when we stored all our human resource information in individual paper files, so every employee had a paper file. I think I still had one at Grand Prairie Regional College. I looked at it once since I was there for 30 years. That bad boy was thick. A lot of good stuff, some bad stuff in that file, right? Now, instead of paper files, we store all this in digitally, right? And the advantage, there's many advantages of storing this digitally. You know, just simple data retrieval, right? If we wanted to take a look at the average age, for example, how close are people in management to retiring, right? Instead of combing through individual files and trying to find that information, you know, file by file, paper file by paper file, that simple database inquiry could be put into your human resource information system and spit that information out in literally in seconds, right? So the digitization of employee information is huge, you know, huge in terms of making things more efficient and making decisions better. And the last one here is EHRM, so electronic human resource management. So two things: the increasing use of social media applications, particularly for communication. communication within the organization, okay, sharing of information. We talked about a learning, we call it culture of learning in a organization. So you can be using internal social media applications to facilitate that. And the other one is hiring. So again, particularly something like LinkedIn, perhaps Twitter. So using those again to try to recruit candidates for open positions. And what else? Okay, and can include most administrative and information gathering activities. So again, instead of using paper forms, fillable forms, is a really good way to go here, right? Self-serve utilities. So instead of phoning somebody up and asking them how many more dollars do I have left in my health spending account, just being able to log into a simple website and figuring that in yourself, right? So that's known as EHRM. So to recap that one, what are we looking at? Describe how technology can be used to improve the effectiveness and impact of human resource management. Well, it can be used to make the administration more efficient. It can be used to support decisions. It can be used to help make decisions, like who should we shortlist, for example. It can be used for the storage of data digitally and retrieval of data digitally. And finally, through convenient services. So, for example, you have self-serve utilities, okay? And second of all, social media for things like communication and perhaps recruiting. Final objective, the final learning objective of the course, and it's a short one. It says, and I quote, what discusses the future for human resource professionals and the role of the Chief Human Resource Officer, or CHRO. Okay, so a little bit of a history lesson here is the HRM function has transitioned over time. So you talk about the 60s, particularly administrative role, processing paperwork, okay? So fill out the forms so that we get taxes are paid. Fill out the forms so that payroll can be done. Fill out the forms so that we can go recruit and hire a new administrative system. So generally, very much secretarial work. In the 80s, it progressed a little bit from just just doing administrative or secretarial to implementing strategy. Okay, can you guys come up with a compensation system that helps us to motivate our salespeople? All right, so you're given, basically instead of just pushing paper, you're actually given tasks, and with these tasks you need to come up with a solution to those. And today we're looking at human resource people ideally who are strategically being used. So rather than just implementing the strategy, they're in on making the strategy. So for example, should we replace our workforce with robots? Okay, and if so, how many robots? Should we pursue a human resource policy that everybody needs a certain level of education in order to, particularly if we're implementing something like a high performance work system? Okay, so to advance to that role, some companies are employing what's called a chief human resource officer. So instead of having a manager or director as the head of your human resource function, you have somebody at the vice presidential level, sometimes called a chief human resource officer. Sometimes you have a chief marketing officer, a chief financial officer, a chief operating officer. So this would be somebody on the same level as those people, sort of the second tier right below the president as far as a senior management person is, and definitely part of the senior management team. So in order to do that particular job as chief human resource officer, you need four things. First of all, you need to understand the business. So besides understanding HR, that accounting, marketing, operations, law, all that stuff is important, okay? So you understand the business or business, you understand human resource management, which makes sense because you're the technical HR expert, obviously. You understand the change process because businesses in this environment are very dynamic environment, need to change and constantly keep up with new things. And finally, to be able to integrate all these, integrate business, human resource management, and change process to add value. All right, and that is embodied by a person called the Chief Human Resource Officer. So to recap, the end of the lightning round here. Discuss the future for human resource professionals and the role of the Chief Human Resource Officer. So the future basically is becoming more strategic. All right, a member of the senior management team. And that's embodied by someone who called the Chief Human Resource Officer, who is at the second highest level of the organization, right below the president, and a valued member of the senior management team. So then let's recap the 5 learning objectives for Chapter 11, High Performance Work Systems, etc. Number 1, high performance work systems are discussed, including the elements. So essentially what we're talking about there is the high performance work system is the whole bag of HR tricks used towards productivity and goals. So you integrate state-of-the-art people practices, state-of-the-art organizational structures, state-of-the-art technology, all focused on organizational goals. So we invest a lot in our people, a lot in our technology, a lot in our administration. We pick some challenging goals, we focus on those goals, and by throwing the whole bag of tricks at the system here, we should end up with higher work performance, particularly, or better business performance, particularly if you're in a creative or a complex environment. Second one, HR can contribute to the high performance work systems in many ways. It can be as mundane as a discipline system, having a proper discipline system like progressive discipline, which we took on, or it can be as progressive as supporting contemporary initiatives such as corporate social responsibility. Number 3, the HR audit is useful for determining whether you've spent your human resource dollars and resources well. Number 4, technology is important for improving efficiency, driving down costs, and also making better decisions through information. And something like an HRIS, Human Resource Information System. It's a great way to do that, where you digitize all your paper files just to make the information far more accessible. And number 5, the HRM function is becoming more strategic over time. So in some organizations, they've elevated the top HR person into something called the CHRO, the Chief Human Resources Officer, and they are a member of the senior management team, which makes sure that people are strategically used in business decisions. Well, people, that's it. That's all. That was 11 chapters of online lectures. So lots of good stuff to learn in there. So make sure you study hard for your final exam. And if you do decide someday to pursue a career in human resource management, this, I hope, was a really good basis for your journey. Peace out.